And then Hannah, I believe that you should have control of my remote control. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute myself, and then hopefully you should be able to take it from here. And obviously, as soon as you finish the presentation, we'll open the floor up to questions. So bear with me a second, I'm just going to mute myself and I'm going to take you off mute.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hannah. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sophie. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to set up your own community energy project. I hope that everyone can hear me. There's not really any way that I can check that apart from just going to hope that you can hear me. Also just so you know, this is my first webinar, so it's all very exciting and high tech. So I've given kind of a talk similar to this a few times before, but so we'll just see how this goes in webinar form. So I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about kind of who I am and why I'm talking to you about this. I'm just trying to make this. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so the first will be kind of like a little introductory session, just talking about who I am and kind of the background of community energy. Just because I know that you're all kind of here for a reason. You've obviously clearly like clicked into it and signed up to it because you're interested in community energy for some reason or another, but it'd be good to kind of just like talk a little bit about what that is and talk about the situation with community energy across the UK and also in London and kind of why it's important and that kind of thing. So who am I? Probably the bit I'm most an expert on of these things. My name's Hannah Short. I was a student at SOAS, and I was one of the co-founders of Solar SOAS when I was in my third year. I'm now no longer a student at SOAS, but I actually work here in a completely different capacity for the Students' Union. So I'm kind of talking to you today, not in relation to my job currently, but as kind of as one of the co-founders of Solar SOAS, and also as a person who's just deeply interested in community energy in general. I'm also now very involved with Community Energy London, which is a network of lots of different community energy projects across London, and so I'm very involved with what it is that they're doing now. And we've just had a number of very exciting recent developments, which I'm looking forward to telling you about, which are very useful for people who are looking to set up community energy projects in London. So knowing about that, there are also a couple of other things which are more like nationally focused that we can discuss as well, because I'm not really a part of Community Energy England, but I went to their conference in March and kind of heard about a number of things that are also very exciting. So just to give a little bit of a brief overview of what community energy is in general, again, I'm assuming that kind of you all have like a bit of an understanding, but I think it would be good to just explain it afresh. So apologies if this is something that you already know, but I think good to just kind of make sure that we all have the same understanding. So I think to me, community energy is like kind of comprises two main things. One of them is a focus on moving towards decentralized energy systems. So at the moment, the UK and like a lot of other countries are very centralized in the way that they generate and distribute electricity. So also just, I'm going to use energy and electricity like fairly interchangeably. They are different, but just for the purpose of this, because it's not a super technical talk, I'm going to use them interchangeably. So in terms of centralized energy systems, that's where kind of electricity is generated kind of in a few key places, and then it's transported everywhere via a grid, via the national grid. But that's actually like a highly inefficient, wasteful way of generating and distributing electricity. And so community energy and decentralized energy systems focuses more on kind of generating it kind of in much smaller pockets locally to where, in relation to where you are, so using it kind of where you are. And so community energy is all about that. And then the other aspect of that is that it's community owned. So the people that are using it and living around it are the ones who kind of own that generation, that method of generation, rather than it being kind of a big energy company as we have right now in the UK, So those big centralized energy systems are owned by, big energy companies, which in the UK are known as the Big Six. So community energy is all about kind of moving to more local, kind of community-owned, usually renewable means of generating electricity. So in terms of community energy in the UK, so it's like community energy exists in lots of different countries to varying degrees, depending on just like how popular it is and also how good the government is at setting up a framework that supports that kind of thing. In the UK, it's still fairly niche and fairly rare, and that's why lots of people haven't really heard of what it is. In terms of nationally, I was just looking at the Community Energy England State of the Sector report, and there are roughly 225 different groups, which is actually not that much. And in terms of actual like generating capacity, that's, I can't remember how much it was exactly, but it was, I think it was something like 100. Okay, I'm actually not going to guess because that will be wrong, but it wasn't in terms of capacity and like how much of a, in terms of percentage, what that is of like the whole of the UK electricity capacity, it's very small. So that's the situation nationally. London is actually even not more dire, but London has an even, in terms of thinking about different cities and how much capacity they have and that kind of thing, London has very few groups. I think it's something like 17 groups, and again, very, very small capacity. Whereas some other cities, I think, for example, Bristol has far more groups per capita and also a higher kind of generating capacity. So in general, community energy is like very small in the UK, but I do think it's like a super important thing that needs to be developed further because it is all about this move to kind of more locally owned and locally based renewable energy systems. And I also think it's nice to counter the kind of, financialization of everything and the kind of urbanization and all this thing of like people kind of getting more spread out and being more disconnected from each other. I think community energy is a really nice way of moving towards a more kind of connected, interactive way of doing stuff, and also of understanding our own electricity system and energy systems. I think that another problem is that people are so divorced from the stuff that's behind what it is that we consume. So everything from like the products that we're using and like where the food that we're eating is grown, like we're so divorced from its origins. I think we should be trying to reconnect with all of them, and a big one of them is electricity. So this, again, community energy allows you to kind of like get to understand it a bit more. But again, in terms of the broader picture, it is a very small percentage of UK generating capacity of the UK's like energy system. So it's important that we understand that when we're going into it. It's not going to be the thing that, I don't think that community energy can be the thing that will kind of replace all our energy needs. But I still think that it's still like an important kind of element of the bigger picture. So good to keep that in mind, just so that we all have like a key understanding of that. So that was kind of quite a long-winded little intro. I'm now, in terms of the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about Solar SOAS and our particular project, just to give you a bit of a background of the experiences that we had and the processes that we went through to help make it a thing. And then we're going to move on to talking about how to set up your own project. And we've actually come up with a nice, neat 15-step guide to setting up your own project. So we're just going to run through that together and talk in a little bit more detail about the different elements of that. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions. So there might be kind of more or less time for that bit, depending on how much I waffle on. We'll try to reduce that. Yeah, and also very excitingly, we just seen in the chat box that we have Damien, who is from Brighton Energy Co-op. So they've installed a massive 210 kilowatts community energy at the University of Brighton, which is like very, very exciting. So we'll kind of, it'll be great to hear from Damien at the end, and great to hear actually from any of you at the end, if, depending on what your situation is, and if you're like looking to start up your own projects or have your own projects, that kind of thing. Yeah, so Solar SOAS, so how we started. So actually, I started at SOAS, I think in 2012, and I came here because I kind of heard about it. It like has a reputation of being like quite a progressive institution, but I came here and I was actually deeply disappointed by the state of like environmental consciousness. I think in general, people have like a very divorced view of environmental rights and the impact of like environmental degradation on kind of human rights and the human experience. And so people here focus a lot on kind of workers' rights and that kind of thing, but like not really on the environmental side of things, even though they're obviously like highly related. So I got here and there are loads of super active campaigns around really, really interesting, important things, but very few on environmental stuff. So I think that is changing. And actually when I was a student, that was also when the divestment kind of movement started happening. I was part of Fossil Free SOAS, and we were kind of one of the first universities to agree to divest, which is super exciting. So it was like this beginning of kind of growing environmental consciousness. And around that time, a lot of the people that were part of that divestment campaign kind of started up different environmental groups, and one of which was the SOAS Energy and Climate Justice Society. And so as part of that society, we would mainly just sit around discussing, basically just discussing the state of the environment, which is obviously pretty dire. And so it was quite a negative, depressing group, and also didn't really feel like we were doing anything. It was very much like sitting there, you know, reading articles and talking about, and just kind of agreeing with each other about how essentially screwed we are. So as part of that society, 2 of our members went on a talk about community energy by the CEO of Repowering London. So his name is Agamemnon Otero, and he's a very, very inspirational speaker. And at that point, none of us had ever heard of community energy. And so 2 of our members like went along to this talk, and they came back extremely enthused about this concept and explained to us, you know, it's all about groups kind of crowdfunding and figuring out ways to financially support setting up renewable energy sources like right where they are. And so we thought, ooh, that's a pretty cool idea. That sounds nice. And so we're like, well, why don't we just try and do that here? And it was just kind of an idea that started to slowly kind of take shape. And at the beginning, it was like very kind of relaxed chat, you know, of like, oh, it'd be really cool if we could do that. And then we did like a bit of research, a bit of looking up what would be involved. We weren't really sure how we would do it. And so at the beginning it was, we were just kind of just like laughing about it. And then the kind of first big thing that happened to us is we started kind of applying for some grants, but again, like not really sure of what to apply for or how. And one that we happened to apply for was the Mayor of London Low Carbon Entrepreneur Award. So we applied for that with our Solar SOAS idea. And lo and behold, we somehow became finalists in this competition. So we were one of 10 finalists, and we basically had to go to City Hall and participate in this kind of Dragon's Den style grilling, where they asked us loads of questions about the project, and it was in front of like a big studio audience. So they asked us loads of questions, and it was a panel of like the CEO of Innocent Smoothies and all these other kind of mainly entrepreneurs rather than low carbon people. So we had to answer questions, and they asked us things. And so we got into the finals of this, and that kind of allowed us to start taking ourselves seriously, because we're like, oh God, actually this is a thing that people think is a good idea, and you know, that people believe like could do something. And also like in preparation for the Dragon's Den style questioning, we had to ourselves like think a bit more seriously about the specifics of the project, because initially you just submit it as an idea, but then obviously people are going to ask questions, so you have to know the answer to these questions. So that forced us to do a lot more work on it. And so we went and we did a presentation, and it was all very, very terrifying. We met Boris Johnson, all sorts of weird things happened. And in the end we lost, but that, I think, at that point we weren't fully clear on a lot of things. So, but the whole process was really important to allow us to like take ourselves seriously. And also while we were there, we got introduced to other people who, we got introduced to other people who, you know, said, oh, if you want to do this, you should talk to this person, this person, this person. So it like really like set the ball rolling. So yeah, I'm just gonna move on to our timeline. So once we became finalists, we were then told about the Urban Community Energy Fund, which was a fund set up by the Department of Energy and Climate Change specifically to support community energy groups. So we started applying for that, and we got rejected. Then we changed our application and resubmitted it, and then got rejected again. And then we like reached out to some other community energy groups who had successfully applied and spoke to them, and they gave us some advice. And then we reapplied again and managed to get it. And that was a £20,000 kind of fund to carry out feasibility studies. Now, feasibility studies, when you start a project like this, you kind of need to establish whether or not it's a project that can actually go forward, okay? So figuring out whether or not it's feasible. And the costs involved in that are actually really high, because you have to do all sorts of kind of like surveys, figure out if you have to get planning permission, figure out like, you know, financial model, all that stuff. And that all takes a lot of money. And there's a good chance that at the end of it, you're gonna figure, not a good chance, but there is a chance that at the end of it, you're gonna figure out that actually, you know, actually it's not a feasible project and you can't do it. But that obviously means that there's risk involved. So this fund was set up to kind of support groups to be able to kind of figure out the feasibility of their project without fear that if it's a no, that wouldn't be okay. So yeah, so we got that £20,000 fund. We then went on to register our group as a kind of official community benefit society. So that's a kind of, not a company, but that's a kind of type of company. So almost like a cooperative. And there are different ones that you can do, also community interest company, as well as some other ones. And we went with that, established as that. We got built heritage status, which is basically the equivalent of planning permission to build on the roof of the building. And then everything happened really quickly. So then the timing of our project was such that we managed to get the old feed-in tariff, which was really good for us because obviously the old feed-in tariff was really, was supposed to incentivize solar, and so it was actually like really good money-wise. And so that means that because we got the old feed-in tariff, and now the project is such that every year the amount of electricity we generate means that we actually make £2,000 and get £2,000 back from the government every year for 20 years. So the feed-in tariff is there to incentivize solar and to make it like financially viable. So we've got that, and that is now, this is the first year that we have had it. We don't have it yet because we're, I'll explain it in a second what the issue is, but the plan is for it to be a kind of green community fund that will be used by the SOAS community, and will be a kind of competition set up so that people can kind of come in and people can kind of, apply with their project ideas, and then this money will allow other kind of green initiatives to take off. So we registered for the feed-in tariff. We kind of established with SOAS that they were okay, this whole situation, and then it was a question of kind of figuring out the money side of things. So this is something that we should also talk about later on, about the different funding structures. But traditionally, community energy projects work in a way that people invest in the project, and over the lifespan of the project, the feed-in tariff, the feed-in tariff, or the way that the electricity that is generated gets sold. We'll talk about more that again in the future. It's quite complicated, but means that the people who have been invested in it get money back over time. So it's kind of like a financial investment. So we explored this option, but because we were under huge time pressure, because we managed to get the old feed-in tariff, that meant that we actually had to have everything set up and built and installed by a certain date, so by September 2016, in order for us to be eligible for that old feed-in tariff. So we were on a very, very tight deadline. And so we were exploring the kind of like investment route, but that actually is like quite like an admin, that's a very kind of complicated administrative situation. So that's traditionally how most community energy projects are set up. But we had to kind of look into other routes. So what we ended up doing was we had, I think this is, we had a kind of, I'm just going to go forward a bit because we had a kind of a mixed funding structure. So we carried out a crowd fund to try and get people to donate, and that was like our initial thing, but we ended up making only about like £2,000, whereas the whole project was about £40,000. So after the crowdfunding wasn't really working, we looked into our other options. We approached the Students' Union and we explained the benefit of this project, and they basically agreed to give us a loan, a 0% interest loan, which is great. They also have invested a portion of money. And so that covered a big chunk, but there was still a bunch left that we needed to cover. So then we approached the school and said, look, because we want to do this, it's a really great project. It will look really good for you as a university. Is this something that you'd be interested in? And then with the university, we kind of established a power purchasing agreement, which means that the solar panels are on the roof and we're leasing the roof from the university. But the solar panels belong to us, and the electricity that we generate on that roof is then being sold back to the university for a very, very small fee. So usually they would be buying that electricity from wherever they're buying their electricity for a bigger fee, but we're choosing to sell it back to them at a much smaller fee. And in exchange, they gave us a grant towards the upfront costs. So the way that it's working is essentially they've put money forward to buy their electricity, and it's just being administered by us. So I know it's quite a complicated situation, but that's kind of how it's worked out. And so we're, as a student society, as a registered community benefit society that's run by students, we own the panels and we're looking after them over the 20-year period. And we kind of still have our loan to pay back, but we're making money every year. So we have money to pay them back, and we have money to kind of give to the SOAS community through our green fund. So that's the kind of structure. I know it's quite complicated. In terms of what's actually up there right now, we've got 114 panels, and we're also looking to expand, which I'll talk about a bit more later. But our green fund, which we can use every year. And because of this long-term governance and because it's kind of an ongoing thing, we're working right now with the Students' Union to figure out a way to ensure that we can have students involved every year. So we're going to try and build it into the Students' Union structure so that every year there's an elected person to be in charge of administering the green fund and of making sure that everything's okay. And in that process, they'll have to kind of learn about the project and how it was set up and all the different things that you need to know, and also be able to administer that green fund. So we managed to crowdfund all that money, or not crowdfund all that money, raise all that money, and it was all very, very tight. The deadline was all super tight, but we managed to get installed by September 2016. And so they've been up there now for a year, which is crazy. But yeah, so that happened then, and we've just been kind of tying up loose ends in the meantime. So that's the project. Again, we're still kind of figuring out some stuff. There's some things that should have been figured out, but haven't yet, but we're just kind of still sorting them out. So like I said about the feed-in tariff, we're just still waiting on confirmation of getting all the leases signed by the university, because we've leased the roof from them. Because we've leased the roof from them, but we just need to get everything fully signed and everything so that we can kind of send it to the feed-in tariff people, and they can then actually release the funds, because they won't release them until they have all that information. So we're just chasing up all these loose ends, but because there's no longer the urgency of the deadline approaching, everyone's kind of been a bit more lax. So that's our project. In terms of what's going on right now, very, very recently, the GLA, so it's the Greater London Authority, and the Mayor of London has released their Solar Action Plan for London, which is super, super exciting. So they've actually got two environment strategies. This is under Sadiq Khan. There's the London Environment Strategy, and there's also the Solar Action Plan for London. So most things fall under the environment strategy. But because Sadiq Khan promised in his manifesto that he would have a solar action plan for London, they've also got a separate one, which is there's a lot of overlap, but he's kind of had to produce this just to show that he's delivering on his manifesto promises. So they are quite similar, but solar action plan for London is super, super exciting, because the GLA have announced that they're going to have a London Community Energy Fund. So this is basically because the Urban Community Energy Fund, which we benefited from and which a lot of community energy groups have benefited from, no longer exists because the Department of Energy and Climate Change no longer exists. That means that loads of community energy projects across the UK have just not been able to be established. So I think the difference year on year for how many community energy projects were kind of registered or trying to apply to exist versus when they cut it, the difference is massive. So the year that they had it, I think there was something, I again don't remember the numbers, it was something like 100 groups like kind of registered to try and start the process, versus when they no longer had it anymore, it was something like 5. Yeah, so anyway, so the Community Energy London submitted as a request to the GLA that this would be super, super helpful for community energy in London if we had some kind of London Community Energy Fund. So the GLA has actually listened, and they've included the London Community Energy Fund in their solar action plan for London. So that money doesn't exist just yet because this is all happening right now, but that money is going to be available very, very soon. So it's a question of people finding out and knowing that it's there and actually like applying for it and going for it. And that's why I think that it's super important for universities across London and actually across the UK as well, because there are other funds similar to that, to kind of figure that out and to actually go for it, because this money and these opportunities do exist. It's just a question of knowing that it's there and going for it. So that fund exists, which is very exciting. There are also a number of other individual funds. So I've listed here the Camden Climate Fund. Again, very, very new. Not many people know about it. And it's, I'm actually not sure if that's the exact name of it, but there's this fund that's big, that different councils are kind of creating to support local groups. So also in Islington. So people that are based in these locations can really like look into those to figure out if they can use them. And same as in Bristol has their own community energy fund. So that's very exciting. The other exciting thing is that the NUS, the National Union of Students, has a very big focus now on kind of divestment and investment. So obviously divestment of university endowments from fossil fuels and investment in green energy alternatives. So not just divesting money and putting it into like other big multinational corporations doing terrible things, but trying to actually push for positive investment. Obviously it can't work directly into community energy because it's a different kind of investment, but just promoting this as a thing. So it's becoming more of a positive thing. Oh, I see somebody turn on their camera for a second. Anyway, so those are the kind of developments in general. And this is, yeah, just different things that we're kind of aware of and looking at. In terms of us specifically, I'm just going to go back a bit. In terms of us specifically, what we're doing, so Solar SOAS has spoken to a number of different universities, and it's all very like tentative of trying to help promote university community energy at other universities. It's very slow going. The reason that we focus on universities is because well, obviously because we were university students and that's how it worked out for us. But also the focus for community energy is usually on like where people are living or working. And actually I think there's a big gap that should be looked into at universities, because universities are filled with young people who have a lot of energy and excitement about doing something positive for the environment and just, you know, doing and trying out new things. And I think this is like a very unique kind of opportunity that people could deeply benefit from. And also because of things like the National Union of Students, there's lots of good ways of kind of reaching out to universities across the UK. So I'm really hopeful that, I mean, I sit on the NUS Sustainability Advisory Board, and I'm really hopeful that it's the kind of thing that we can try and like promote more consistently. Because the model is there, the money in some ways is there in some places. It's just a question of people like being interested in it and taking it forward and trying to make it happen, as with most things. So, but you know, this is like an interesting way of kind of doing something for the climate positive related stuff where you are. Okay, so that's Solar SOAS. I know that was quite long and a bit convoluted. It's quite complicated, to be honest, because obviously it's been like a whole thing that's like grown weirdly. And it's also difficult to explain if you haven't really been involved in community energy before, because it's a lot of like business related, like establishing of a registered company and putting creating a website, yes, but also bank account, blah blah blah. But that's actually part of one of the interesting things about this project is that it is like very much about project management, and like, it helps hone lots of skills in different areas. It's not just for people with like super technical backgrounds or whatever. It like allows you to like learn about lots of different things. So it allows you to learn about renewable energy, but also about like business development, marketing, all sorts of different things. So it's a really good opportunity for students to get involved with. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the whole purpose of this webinar, which is how to set up your own university community energy project. So on the back of our project, when everything was said and done, as a group, we kind of had a little think about how it was that we set up our project and the different steps that we went through. And so we created this guide as a way to support other people doing it. And this basically lists out the steps that we took, not necessarily in this order, but these are the general things that you have to do to try and help make your project a reality. So we actually created this for the NUS Green Impact Award, because as part of that, we submitted our project idea, and they wanted a kind of deliverable or like a product to help others. So we created this, which is actually very, very useful, and allowed us to kind of reflect a bit more fully on what worked well for us and what didn't work well, and how we would advise other people to do it. Because when we started our project, we had no idea what to do. And actually, we've now realized that there are other resources and things that we could have followed that would have helped us, but we didn't know that they existed. So instead, we just made it up. We just like went along and made it up. So we've created this to kind of help other people not do what we did. So this 15-step guide, I'm just going to kind of run through it and like talk a little bit about each of the different bits. And then following that, we can like open things up for questions. And I'd love to hear from people about, where you're at, if you want to start up your own project, if you have experience doing your own projects. So I know that there are people who are here who have, which is really exciting. So I'd love to hear from you. So number one, most important step of the whole thing is form a group of enthusiastic volunteers. So this kind of project takes a lot of volunteer hours and time and interest, and it's not the kind of thing that you can kind of force people to do. Like I said earlier, we're trying to help start up a project at UCL, so Solar UCL. But the problem there is that obviously we, on the back of Solar SOAS, are really excited about bringing it to other universities. But and there are people who are interested there, but it's very much directed by us at the moment, whereas it really needs to be directed by the people. And that's the difficulty, I think, when you've done your own project and you want to help other people do theirs, because you don't want to be too overbearing. But really it has to come from them. And actually, I think in many ways it would be best for us to kind of almost completely step back. But you need to kind of form a group of enthusiastic volunteers, of people who have a shared vision and a willingness to work on the project. We're really lucky at Solar SOAS that we just so happen to have a group of around 4 or 5 people who like really wanted to make it happen, and we're willing to kind of put loads and loads of energy into it, and that kind of just happened. So so trying to form a group with other people who are into environmental stuff at SOAS, all the environmental groups, all kind of 4 or 5 of the societies have the exact same people. So yeah, I don't know how it works at other universities, but that would be good to kind of, a good thing would be to set up a society, to have a stall at Freshers Fair, to try and kind of, do a film screening, and afterwards talk to people about starting up a project, but basically finding other people who are interested and starting up regular meetings to figure out what needs to happen and how. So number 2 is identify suitable green energy sources on campus. So figuring out what is most appropriate for you. Again, these steps are related to universities, but can also be, applied to like any kind of community. So it can be schools, can be like your local, where you live, can be your church, kind of anything. But we're just focusing on universities because that's, again, what our experience was. So number 2, identify suitable green energy sources. So for us, because we're a London-based university, it was kind of obvious that solar was the only option available, but that's not the case for lots of other places. So I know in Lancaster they have like a massive wind turbine, which is amazing. It's not a community energy project, and this is an important distinction. It's something I think that's owned by the university, run by the university energy manager, which is different to it being owned and run by the students, as in like a community energy project. But it's still cool that they are able to do that. And, you know, should a student group want to start up their own project there, they could also, you know, look into wind turbines. So depending on where you are, look into different things. And like for that, you know, yeah. So identify suitable green energy sources. Number 3, launch the project idea. So try and get the word out there that this is what you're trying to do. The way that we did that here at SOAS is that we have union general meetings as a way to establish what students' union policy is across campus. They happen once every couple of months, and during one of these union general meetings, we kind of introduced Solar SOAS as an idea. We said, hey, we would love to install solar panels on the roof of the building and have them be owned by students. Would people like be up for that? Are they interested in making that happen? And the students' union and people voted like, yes, this is something that we want. And so as a result, at SOAS, the way that our constitution works is that that then became union policy. And that meant that when we were approaching the school, we then had the kind of student mandate or the mandate of knowing that the student body was behind our idea, rather than just being a group of 4, you know, eco people, who are also obviously important, but, you know, from the school's perspective, I think they just will consider it more if it's like from kind of the student body. So launching the project idea, maybe at your institution or where you are, there will be a different kind of mechanism for getting lots of people involved, but just like thinking about that to get the word on the street and to gather support. Maybe a petition is also an idea, or just to demonstrate that you have support. So number 4 and number 2 are kind of interchangeable. So identify your university's energy manager or equivalent. So arrange to meet and ask them, you know, if they've looked into this before, if they know about the roofs or about any other kind of estates related questions that they that you may have, that you want to know about, who owns it, that kind of thing. Because I know, for example, because we've reached out to a lot of different buildings around SOAS now, and so I know that, for example, at Senate House, the kind of energy sustainability manager is really great, and he's been looking into lots of stuff, and they'd looked into solar, but it was difficult because of like the payback of the project. It was difficult for them to raise capital for that. And then for UCL, I know that they've also looked into it, but like again, it's like so small and like not really something that they are interested in looking into, just because in the grand scheme of the buildings, the carbon emission savings is so small that it's like not really worth it. So it's like all these, so like a lot of them have thought about it, but it's good to speak to them and kind of establish what the situation is. And with UCL, it's interesting, or actually with most buildings, it's interesting because energy managers will say, oh, it's like not really worth it, it's so small. So they're probably not going to do it. But if it's a student-led thing, and it's the students that are kind of putting in the effort to make it a project, I think it's definitely very beneficial. Even if you're looking at the whole carbon emissions, like the carbon budget of the whole building, it's a small percentage, but as a thing that students can do and can initiate and can make happen, that's like quite significant as compared with like not doing anything, if that makes sense. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, so identify your university's energy manager. Our one here at SOAS, Stephen McKinnell, is amazing and was super helpful. And luckily he'd actually installed solar panels at his previous university, City University. So had lots of experience with that. But that project was again led by the school, so led by the energy managers rather than by the students. So he was really excited that in this project it was led by the students, and he was very helpful. But there are lots of energy managers who have looked into carbon emission savings and have looked into this kind of thing, so good to speak to them about it. So number 5 is find one or more contractors. So for us solar contractors, to discuss feasibility. So we contacted solar installers and spoke to them about the roof space and how much we were talking, like how much energy capacity could be installed. how much that would cost, what are the timelines involved, and you want to get like multiple, because you don't want to just go for the first one that you happen to find on Google, but kind of speak to multiple to make sure that the quotes that you're getting and things are correct. And these you can generally do for free if it's like a desktop survey, which means they just do it based on the building plans. So number 6 is money. Work out how you will fund the early and later stages of the project. So like I said, the urban community, God, I'm out of breath from like, I guess maybe I'm talking quite fast. I'll try and talk a little bit slower. I get really excited and talk really fast. Yeah, so money. So like I said earlier, Urban Community Energy Fund is what we use to kind of fund the feasibility, early stages of the project. But that doesn't exist in the same way that it used to anymore. So it's a question of figuring out how else to fund that. So again, now there's like the London Community Energy Fund. There's also lots of universities themselves have their own kind of student enterprise funds. So really, really important to look into that. The NUS used to have, I think it was called a green, what was it called? NUS Students Green Fund. I don't think that's necessarily directly available anymore, but kind of similar things to that. They do exist. It's a question of looking them up. Marks and Spencer's has also a community energy fund that they have every now and then. So it's just a question of looking at different things. And by the way, although the Urban Community Energy Fund no longer exists, I think that the Rural Community Energy Fund does, but I'm not quite sure who falls into that rural category. So it's a question of kind of looking up based on where you are, what's available to you. So thinking about money, looking at different money sources is really important. So number 7, like now that you're like you've got this idea of what it is that you want to do. Now you have to figure out how it is that you can actually kind of convince the university to do it. So number 7 is identify decision-making structures at the university and meet with individuals and management. So setting up meetings, talking to people. We're lucky at SOAS because it's so small that it's relatively easy to make these connections and to kind of figure out who it is that you need to speak to and to actually speak to them. Obviously, I think it's a bit more complicated at larger institutions because there's just so many people and it's just difficult to get that same kind of recognition. So you have to figure out different routes by which to make that happen. So number 8, explore formal legal business structures. Very exciting. So good for this to get kind of actual professional advice. And this is when it can be good to have money to kind of pay someone who knows about these things. So I think for us, we paid Share Energy, who are kind of like an official community energy project management service. And they're really, really amazing. And they super helped us with all of this kind of stuff. So number 9, name and register the project as your chosen structure. So yeah, so we have ours is called Uni Solar. So just so you know, Solar SOAS is our pilot project, but our actual community benefit society is registered as Uni Solar. So that's capital U, capital S. So our idea was that Solar SOAS would be our first project and that we'd help kind of support and be part of projects across the UK at other universities. And which means that if we were to like work with people, then it wouldn't be a case of other universities registering their own community benefit society, but instead kind of like us being the registered community benefit society and supporting like that particular project. Obviously it depends what the situation is, and we're not really at that stage yet, but that's just a potential thing that could happen. So number 10, figuring out financial model. So our initial financial model was from my uncle, who's an economist, and that was the kind of very early stages model that we had. But then again, you know, as you get money for feasibility, good to kind of like look into more like actual official financial models, again, from people like Share Energy who understand all the different things involved. Number 11, stakeholder engagement. So kind of reaching out, making sure that people support you and figuring out what people want, what the situation is, and just letting people know what you're doing. Number 12, engage with your local council. Again, reaching out to all the different people around. People love this kind of project because it's a positive thing. People will basically always support it unless it's like going to be in the way of a roof that was, you know, going to be dedicated for something else that they wanted to do. But people like a positive project. So it's so easy to get kind of MP quotes of support, so easy to get like council support, so easy to meet up with people to talk about this, which is really nice and uplifting for everyone involved. So yeah, 13, get started with Rural Community Energy Fund or other big fund applications. So again, these don't have to be in complete order because that could actually happen earlier on. Although I think you might have to be registered, so, but good to kind of figure out depending on what the stipulations of the particular fund are. And then 14, get investment ready, so raise capital, figuring out what your capital structure is going to be. And then 15, make lasting friendships, join the energy revolution, spread the word. So yeah, this is not, this is not an exhaustive list of all the things that one has to do, but it's definitely a kind of a general overview and important things to consider when starting your own community energy project. So that's the end of our little guide. So I just written here the main challenges are: number 1, getting an interested group together, doing that, and then getting money to carry out feasibility studies. And also, I haven't actually mentioned this, the impact of lower feed-in tariffs. Like I said, in our project, we had the higher feed-in tariff, which made it helpful in terms of kind of this green community fund that we're going to be getting back. But now that feed-in tariff is has been lowered significantly, so that fund wouldn't exist. But there's still a case to be made for places to put up the money. So basically, in our situation, if the feed-in tariff had been as low as it is currently, it would have still made sense for the school to give us the grant that they did give us, because like I said earlier, they're essentially insuring the cost of electricity over the lifespan of the project. So they're basically buying that electricity over 20 years, but just paying up front. And they're doing that because we gave them the very favorable power purchasing agreement, which meant that they were buying it back for a very low fee. And that's still the case with other places. So this is slightly different again from the kind of structure that many other community energy projects follow, because a lot of other community energy projects are all about kind of the investment side of things. I think the investment side of things is like a bit more difficult to argue now, but you can argue it in terms of the buying of the electricity over the lifespan of the project. The other great thing about university community energy, this is just a side note that I just remembered, is that the benefit of it is that you're in a building that will be using electricity all the time, okay, which is different from, anyway, actually I won't go into that, but yeah, basically in other places it's a bit more difficult because you have to deal with the issue of people being out during the day when the panels are generating electricity, and then you have to deal with the issue of kind of what happens at that point. But here you're fine because at universities buildings are running all day and are using that electricity throughout the day. But anyway, so that's that. Listed here a couple of useful websites to check out if you're interested. So there's Community Energy England, which is like a member-based organization of all community energy, not all, but lots of community energy projects across the UK. They have a very interesting state of the sector report if you want to find out more about other existing projects and how they've worked and that kind of thing. Also listed communityenergy.london, which is the Community Energy London website, and which coincidentally I also made. So it's just that's just a list of all the different projects in London. Then there's Hub Community Energy England, and that's basically a hub of lots of different community energy related resources that you can look up. Again, like I said earlier, that's a thing that we didn't know existed when we started our project, and which would have been really useful. And then there's things like Bristol Community Energy and different like city-based community energy resources. So if you have any other suggestions or ones to include, feel free to put them in the chat box. So yeah, basically in the process of doing our project, we've spoken to so many different other organizations and who have been really, really helpful and are all doing amazing things. So it's been a really interesting journey to figure out and to encounter all these different organizations. I actually also then went on to work for Repowering London as an intern for 3 months, which was super interesting and really, yeah, great to just see all the different things that are going on. So, hang on. So yeah, I think that's the end of the main presentation. Yes, okay. There we are, just on to the question slide. So if anybody has any questions, I would love to hear from you.
What I will say is, if anyone's got any questions, you're all currently on mute at the moment, so if you just unmute yourselves and then be able to ask questions. Alternatively, use the chat box. I'm just going to take myself off. Oh, we just had one in from Gilbert. Who insures the solar panels against damage over the 20 years?
It's a good question. You do have to kind of, you have to get specific insurance. So there's a really good environmental kind of insurance company called Nature Save, which a lot of community energy groups, including us, have used. So Nature Save have a special kind of community energy based insurance scheme that you have to sign up to. So that's, but yeah, I mean, as kind of, as solar set or as Uni Solar kind of owns the solar panels, that is something that we have to, we are liable for and have to figure out, but that's why we have this insurance, and that's what part of the feed-in tariff money goes towards. Cool, so Damien also uses Nature Save at Brighton Energy. Actually, Damien, it would be wonderful to hear from you. I don't know if you have a, if you can unmute yourself or if you have access.
Yeah.
Great.
That's me, I'm muted.
Hello. Okay, well, yeah, it would be great if you could maybe kind of explain a little bit about your project. And
yeah, so we've existed for 7 years now, I think. Originally set up when the feed-in tariff was set up in the UK, so 2010. And we did our first installations in 2012. We did about 135 kilowatts, and since then we're probably at about 1.6 megawatts now. And we've installed on schools, university buildings, warehouses, factories, churches, basically anywhere that will have us, that particularly now also has high electricity usage. So I mentioned that we've installed at the University of Brighton, we installed 60 kilowatts there on the old feed-in tariff. That was actually in September 2016. And then in June this year, we installed another 150 kilowatts. And we're actually able to make the economics work with the existing feed-in tariff as it is now, because we charge the university a little bit more for electricity, so maybe 7.5p per kilowatt hour. But with the quite low installation costs of PV, the economics still work. So yeah, we're going ahead doing more projects.
how do you manage to get the low installation costs? Also, did you speak at Community Energy England conference?
No, my colleague Will did though.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, partly because we've been doing this for quite a while, so we really know all the costs of the various components that go into an array, and we shop around, and we've used a variety of installers over the last few years. But also we've got a partnership with a business based up in the northwest in Chester, who can purchase sort of economies of scale. They've been doing it for a long time as well, and they can hit sort of sub £700 per kilowatt price for installation, which makes projects going forward quite viable.
And what's the name of that organization based in Chester?
Genfit, GENFIT.
Okay. And, how do you kind of figure out new places to install on?
How do we figure out where to install, did you say?
Yeah.
It's partly a business development exercise, so we're identifying large groups of all different types of organisations in Brighton and in wider Sussex, and then we contact them and have a sort of face-to-face meeting, talk through the benefits, which is generally saving thousands of pounds a year if they have a large roof on their electricity costs, and the cost to them, which is basically just going to be their legal fees for the lease. And after that, we take care of all the rest of the costs and maintenance and cleaning, etc. So yeah, it's quite we operate pretty much on a commercial basis. We are a community benefit society, but we've all got sort of background in business. So we found that the way to survive and to keep growing is to be very commercially astute in how we operate, but to deliver triple bottom line benefits in terms of commercial, social, and environmental. So yeah. Quite a sort of social enterprise approach.
Yeah, are there any moves to kind of expand in places other than Brighton?
Sorry, I'll have to turn up the volume. I can't hear you very well.
Oh, I said, are there any plans to kind of expand in places other than Brighton?
Yeah, so we have arrays in Kent and in Surrey as well, a couple of locations, but we're open to other sites. Predominantly focused on the southeast, just because of the logistics of visiting quite often, which you certainly have to do in the sort of early stages and when the array is being installed. But yeah, we're certainly open to partnerships with other organisations anywhere in the country.
Yeah, I mean, would you ever provide any kind of consultation for other places?
Yeah, I mean, we could. There's sort of 3 different levels there. We could fully fund an array on a university campus, I guess, somewhere else, and own it, as we do with the University of Brighton. We could partially fund, so it could be 50% owned by our investors, 50% by the students, or however the mix worked. Or we could provide consultancy, as you've had from Share Energy, on basically how to run the project. And we actually use Share Energy for our office administration and accounting, so we know them quite well.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess it just depends on what the focus is, because I guess your model is really good for kind of maximizing and what we're talking about is kind of, I think would be better for like London thing of like ensuring that the help in helping to set it up, but then also it would be very useful to kind of have more professional life. At the moment, that's kind of what we're trying to do, of like helping other people sort stuff out, but obviously we're all doing this, on the side. It's not like our main thing.
Yeah.
So it would be great to kind of point people also in your direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is predominantly the 3 of us work part-time on Brighton Energy Co-op, but it is kind of our main focus, renewable energy, and particularly community energy. And we've all, we're in our 40s, and well, actually, one of our guys is in his 50s. So we've been there and done it in different business guises, and worked, in different sectors for 2.5 decades or something. So we've got a lot of business experience.
And it's really, uplifting to hear that it's still like tariff.
Yeah, that was the whole intention, was that, I suppose, like any government incentive, that at some point it would go down. So, they talk about a glide path as a model, that at a certain point, or a descent path, that it should be smooth, that as the economics of solar dropped, or, the cost of installation dropped, that the government support should commensurately drop as well. But what happened in 2015, 2016 was a sort of cliff edge, which meant, well, there was a sort of an estimate, maybe 12,000 solar jobs lost as a consequence, rather than if it had been done more smoothly. The solar industry would still be working really well, but partly because we've got lots of arrays on the old feed-in tariff, and that sort of pays a lot of our core costs, and partly because we're very sort of lean in our operations, and having a good partnership with an installer who can install at a low cost, we can still do projects going forward.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's really good to have you here.
No problem. I'll just put our website up, but actually it's down at the moment for some reason, but it's just because we changed hosting providers. But if anybody wants to look at us or contact us, then yeah, please do so, and good luck with your own university projects as well.
Thank you. So that's Damien from Brighton Energy.
Yeah.
There's also a comment from Dan saying from Reading Community Energy Manager at Reading. The Reading community raised more than £200,000 in 2 weeks, which is amazing.
Sorry to interject quickly, Hannah, you're a little quiet. Is there any way you can speak up slightly?
Okay, cool. Was I quiet the whole time?
No, it just kept dipping in and out.
Okay, interesting.
No, not during the presentation, just in the last sort of couple of minutes. So just
yeah, so we've also got Dan here from Reading University, and he's the community energy manager, which is great. The Reading community raised over £200,000 in the power purchasing agreement, which is what PPAs are, and then prove attractive for organizations because no upfront and fixed energy for 20 years, which is exactly the great point of, like, if it's student-led or community-led, that means that they kind of do all the hard work, and then it just means that whoever is buying the electricity can then just kind of buy it in one go. And then a last comment from Dan is that you can only apply for feed-in tariffs once, so important to bear this in mind on a campus facility. So to kind of plan ahead as to how many projects you're planning to do, this is something that we're also kind of thinking about at the moment. And then Damien just posted a link to their website, brightonenergy.org.uk. So that's a really great organization if you're looking to kind of start your own project with loads of different, with lots of experience. So I think that actually we've come to time now. So it's been an hour. So Sophie, I don't know if you're there.
I am there. I'm back. So thank you so much, Hannah. That was brilliant. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've recorded the webinar, so both the presentation and the webinar will be made available on our resources. Just to let you know as well, we are actually going to be having a divestment webinar, not until January, so you've got some time to plan ahead. And obviously we'll send some more comms out, but that's quite pertinent, obviously, given the topic of today's webinar and everything else. I'm also going to send out a short survey so we can just gain everybody's feedback. So if you have a couple of minutes, you can complete that. That'd be fantastic. If there are any other additional questions, please fire them through to me, and then obviously I can forward them on to Hannah on your behalf. But other than that, thank you so much, Hannah. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, everybody. So that's the end of today's webinar.
Bye. Thank you.